Hey everybody, it's Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, and in Matthew 21, verse 12, Jesus goes right into Jerusalem and goes into the temple and wrecks the place. Not the temple part. He was in favor of the temple part, and he liked the God who lives there as his father. He's a big fan of that. He was not a big fan of the shenanigans that were going on with the exploitative business practices, and maybe wasn't a big fan of even how they had situated business stuff inside the grounds of the temple. Well, whatever the case, he lets that unhappiness and displeasure be known by cleansing the temple. I suppose that would be the Bible term for what happens. And as we've discussed several times over the last few days, the account in Matthew 21, starting in verse 12, goes thusly. Jesus entered the temple and drove out all who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves. It's written, he said to them, "My house will be called a house of prayer, but you're making it into a den of robbers." And then as we've discussed, people aren't mad about this. They come to him in even greater numbers right after that, and that begs the question, well, why? Why would people be into it? Well, I think part of the answer is because the people who were there and the people in the original audience to whom Matthew was writing his account would have expected that when stuff gets weird and sideways in Jerusalem and around the temple, God will raise somebody up to clean up the mess, to stop the circus right where it is. And there are Bible examples that we started to look at yesterday that I think would have been rattling around in the noggins of the people who saw this going on. The first of which, well, I guess it doesn't really matter what order we go in, but the first of which that we're going to look at is in 2 Kings 23, 1 through 7. And in 2 Kings 21, you get the account of a king named Manasseh, who was a complete dumpster fire of a human. He was in favor of sacrificing babies by slow roasting on the hands of a metallic altar to a bull man god named Molech that people were a fan of in this area. And so a lot of times when we look back at the Old Testament, we're like, wow, God seems really judgy at times. It seems like he's super mad about these just different cultural practices that people from different cultures had. Why would God be so upset and want to bring punishment on these other cultures for just being how other cultures are? But then you look into some of the stuff they actually did, and some of it you're like, oh, wow, no, I totally get it. My sense of justice in the world is completely offended because people were baking humans to death, their babies, their own children, to this false god that had this horrible, violent cult. And God's chosen people, the ones he set aside with promises that he made to Abraham and Moses and David, like some of them were participating in it. And eventually some of the priesthood started to participate in it. And some of the kings were participating in it. And some of the kings, even effectively by their actions, were outlawing the worship of the actual God and were mandating the worship of stuff like this. Or I should say very close to mandating the worship of this really gross, evil, violent, pagan death cult stuff. So Manasseh is horrible and desecrates the temple and the souls of his people. Ammon, his successor, is horrible. He does evil in the sight of God. Well, specifically in verse 20, it says, he did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and he walked in the ways of his father. He worshiped idols and did a bunch of other terrible things. And then we get to chapter 22. I said 23. I don't know why I said that. It's in 22. And we get the rare change of pace, the change up where somebody actually did a pretty good job, and it doesn't even really say why. It just picks up with this after these horrible, violent, bloodthirsty pagan kings of old. You get this one. Josiah was 8 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 31 years. Well, that's pretty good. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord and walked in the ways of his father David. Again, when these guys are getting it right, they are likened to being sons of David, descendants of David. And we've made that connection to what that title means in the New Testament when it's directed at Jesus as well. It's worth noting again here. He was not turning aside to the right or to the left. And now we get into his actual story. Check this out. 18 years in, 18 years into this job as king out of 31, it says in the 18th year of his reign, King Josiah sent the secretary, Shaphan, son of Azaliah, man, these are tough, the son of Meshullam, to the temple of the Lord, and he said, "Go up to Hilkiah the high priest and have him get ready the money that's been brought into the temple of the Lord, which the doorkeepers have collected from the people. Have them entrust." So this would be, I suppose, the temple tax is what we're talking about here, the same one that was paid with the tetradrachma coin, the Tyrian shekel that was found in the mouth of that tilapia, that St. Peter's fish in Capernaum. So, we're connecting dots. All right, so we got this money from the doorkeepers, and Josiah says, "Have them entrust it to the men appointed to supervise the work on the temple, and have these men pay the workers who repair the temple of the Lord, the carpenters, the builders, and the masons. Also have them purchase timber and dress stone, and we'll pay for it with all of this money." That's a summary. So Hilkiah the high priest said to Shaphan the secretary, "I found the book of the law in the temple of the Lord." And he gave it to Shaphan, who read it. Then Shaphan the secretary went to the king and reported to him, "Your officials have paid out the money that was in the temple of the Lord and have entrusted the workers and supervisors at the temple." Then Shaphan the secretary informed the king. And he continues here. "And also Hilkiah the priest has given me a book." And Shaphan read from it in the presence of the king. And then heads up, this is where it gets crazy. Verse 11. "When the king heard the words of the book of the law, he tore his robes." And then to summarize the next couple of chapters, he tells Hilkiah, all right, we're changing everything. All the stuff that we were supposed to be doing, this whole deal between us and God was about, it was all lost and it was all shanked and we're screwing everything up. And so we're going to have to clean up our act. We got to clean out the garage, like right now. And then in chapter 23, it says, "Then the king called together all the elders of Judah and Jerusalem, and he went up to the temple of the Lord with the men of Judah, the people of Jerusalem, the priests and the prophets, all the people from the least to the greatest. And he read in their hearing all the words of the book of the covenant, which had been found in the temple of the Lord. And the king stood by the pillar and renewed the covenant in the presence of the Lord, to follow the Lord and keep his commands, regulations, and decrees with all his heart and all his soul, thus confirming the words of the covenant written in the book. Then all the people pledged themselves to the covenant." And then it goes on to give us this massive account of everything that was desecrated and screwed up being cleaned up and thrown out and made right, and they try to do things the right way. And so this is the very important account of King Josiah rediscovering the book of the law and doing a cleansing of himself, his own soul, and rededicating himself to the temple. And everybody would have known this story in Jerusalem, at least all the Jewish people would. They all would have known about how things got crazy sideways and what the consequences of that were. The very political and philosophical thesis of the Pharisees, their religious teachers at the time of Jesus, was that we didn't obey God enough before. We didn't go over the top and really make sure we got it right. And so he punished us per the terms of the covenant he made with Moses. And so now we got to do stuff like what Josiah did. We have got to clean up our act so that we will receive the blessings of God again. So surely because of the philosophy and strategy of the religious leaders at the time of Jesus, everybody would have heard this story. It would have been a cautionary tale. It would have been something put in front of them again and again, or rather an exemplary tale to get them to do things the right way. And then over in 2 Chronicles 29, I'm in 1 Chronicles. That's not even close. That's just not the right, it's not the right book. It's like I don't even do this. And it's like I don't even read this document or know what I'm doing. There it is. 2 Chronicles 29, starting in verse 3 is where I'm going to read in a second. It's about this other good king who comes along named Hezekiah after another bunch of really awful, terrible kings. And he does what is right in the eyes of the Lord. Verse 2, just as his father David had done. There's that theme again. It's not just in Kings, it's also in Chronicles. And then it says that in the first month of the first year of his reign, he opened the doors of the temple of the Lord and replaced them. He brought in the priests and the Levites and assembled them in the square on the east side and said, "Listen to me, Levites, consecrate yourselves." Now, Levites are like the priestly class in this age of Bible history. "And consecrate the temple of the Lord, the God of your fathers. Remove all defilement from the sanctuary. Our fathers were unfaithful. They did evil in the eyes of the Lord our God and forsook him. They turned their faces away from the Lord's dwelling place and turned their backs on him." And there's a whole bunch more in 2 Chronicles 29 about how Hezekiah follows through on this and does indeed purge and cleanse the temple and gets things back on track for a little while. What we see here is that there would indeed be an expectation in distant cultural memory and in very recent cultural memory that the true liberator, the one who is raised up by God, would come and resolve these problems in the temple, would set things right. So even in the incomplete understanding of Jesus that we see that the crowds have in Matthew 21. I mean, the crowds answer, this is Jesus, the prophet from Nazareth in Galilee. That's the immediate preceding verse to the passage we're looking at with the cleansing of the temple. This means that the original witnesses to this thing, while they might not have totally understood who Jesus was, they at least had enough of a sense that they would expect behavior kind of like this from him, and they were not alarmed, but in fact intrigued when they saw this continuation of this historical motif of God raising somebody up to take care of his house. Thank you for going along with me on our trot through the Old Testament the last couple of days. We're back into Matthew with more focus mañana. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.